Let's commence the 84th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We have as our witness Minister Goodale and a variety of his departments represented by various people. I'll leave the minister to introduce. We are under some time pressure, colleagues, as the minister has to be out of here at 9:45 sharp in order to be able to give a statement in the House on behalf of Minister Seamus O'Regan. So over to the minister who needs no introduction and therefore will get none.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm very pleased, I think, to have the opportunity this morning to speak to the committee about my portfolio Supplementary Estimates B. To assist me, I'm joined today by Malcolm Brown, who is the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Gilles Michaud, Deputy Commissioner for Federal Policing in the RCMP, David Vigneault, who is the new Director of CSIS, and I believe, David, this is your first appearance before, in that capacity before a parliamentary committee. Peter Hill is the Associate Vice President in the Programs Branch of CBSA, and then Kelly is the Senior Deputy Commissioner for the Correctional Service of Canada. Il me fait plaisir d'avoir l'occasion.
It's my pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you this morning about the Supplementary Estimates B. We are asking authorization to continue to ensure Canadian security, all the while respecting rights and freedoms.
Get into the estimates, though, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a moment to recognize that we are meeting this morning only a few days after Constable John Davidson of the Abbotsford Police Department was shot and killed in the line of duty. In our jobs, we are privileged to meet police and other public safety officers and to deepen our appreciation of the difficult, dangerous, and absolutely indispensable work that they do. And we certainly share in the pain and in the profound sense of loss when an officer falls in the line of duty. I know that all of you join me in offering our sincere condolences to Constable Davidson's family and friends, to Chief Rich and his colleagues on the police force, and to the entire community at Abbotsford. Now to the matter at hand. The public safety portfolio in these estimates is requesting adjustments resulting in a net increase in authorities of $223 million. As always, our objective is to keep Canadians safe while at the same time safeguarding rights and freedoms. In my remarks this morning, I will briefly explain how the authorities we are seeking in these supplementary estimates will do that. The largest chunk of this funding will go to the RCMP, including over $60 million to implement the salary increases announced in April, which will be paid retroactively going back to January the 1st, 2015. We're also seeking over $28 million in integrity funding. And I was pleased to note that the recent economic update also included an additional $100 million to support RCMP operations and the RCMP's External Review Committee. This funding reflects some of the remedial measures that we were taking after the RCMP underwent over $500 million in cuts between 2011 and 2015 to ensure RCMP members have the resources and support they need to keep doing their job of protecting communities and the country. We've also passed, as you know, Bill C-7 to bring the RCMP labor relations regime in compliance with the Charter and in compliance with a judgment of the Supreme Court of Canada. And that will, for the first time ever, give members of the force the right to bargain collectively. That legislation received royal assent in June, and the process of certifying a bargaining agent is now underway. As all members will know, 2 studies on harassment in the force were completed earlier this year, one by the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission and the other by former Auditor General Sheila Fraser. Both of these reports are informing our way forward as we continue working to ensure the RCMP provides its employees with a safe and healthy workplace. And of course, that objective applies to every department and agency of the Government of Canada. And we've stepped up recruiting, with the RCMP's Training Academy in Regina graduating 938 new officers in the fiscal year 2016-17. That's almost triple the number from 2013-14. This current year should generate another 1,100 new graduates, and then more than 1,200 in 2018-19. I've had the privilege of attending several graduation ceremonies at Depot, welcoming Canada's newest Mounties to an organization with a long and proud history, and you can be assured that I will keep doing everything I can to make sure that the RCMP's best days lie ahead of it, despite its fantastic history. The RCMP is also included among the recipients of the $274 million over 5 years that we announced this past summer to support law enforcement in their efforts to combat impaired driving. In these estimates, Public Safety Canada, CBSA, and the RCMP are seeking a combined total of $20.1 million for the implementation of an initiative to build capacity to address drug-impaired driving. We also recognize the importance of public education. That's why my department is seeking an additional $2.5 million to raise awareness about the risks and consequences of drug-impaired driving. This funding will support an upcoming advertising campaign to discourage Canadians, especially young and new drivers, from driving after using drugs. And it will build on a social media campaign that we ran last March targeting young drivers and their parents. Driving while under the influence of alcohol or drugs is the leading criminal cause of death and injury in Canada. This funding and the important new legislative measures in Bill C-46 are important parts of our efforts to prevent, detect, and punish impaired driving and to keep our roads safe. Some $9.2 million is also being sought for the Department of Public Safety, the RCMP, and CBSA related to the new cannabis framework to be implemented next year. These include measures to ensure that organized crime is kept effectively out of the new legal system for dealing with cannabis and to beef up interdiction at the border. Mr. Chair, we're also seeking authorities related to some of the extreme weather events that Canadians have experienced this year. Severe flooding caused a great deal of damage to homes and communities in several provinces across Canada this past spring, particularly in Quebec and Ontario. And this summer's wildfire season in British Columbia was, as we know, one of the worst in recent memory. We are deeply grateful to the brave firefighters and other first responders who answered the call, as they always do, as well as the many ordinary, or rather extraordinary, Canadians who filled sandbags, volunteered at shelters, and generally stepped up to help friends and neighbors and strangers in need. When a natural disaster strikes, one of our key partners is always the Canadian Red Cross. The organization contributed greatly to a number of relief activities this year, including distributing immediate financial assistance to evacuees. And we are pleased to contribute to the Red Cross, including $1 million to support its flood relief efforts across Canada this past spring, and $38.6 million to support its relief efforts related to the BC wildfires. These transfers account for a portion of the total authorities that we're requesting today. And finally, Mr. Chair, the Correctional Service of Canada is requesting $12 million to address the needs of vulnerable offenders in the federal corrections system. Over 70% of male offenders and almost 80% of female offenders meet the criteria for some type of mental disorder, including substance abuse and misuse. To ensure that they receive proper care, you will recall that Budget 2017 proposed to invest $57.8 million over 5 years, starting this fiscal year, and then $13.6 million per year thereafter. These funds are for the expansion of mental health care supports in federal correctional facilities, and following up very specifically on advice that we have received over time from the correctional investigator. CSC's requests in these estimates for additional funding is part of upholding this important commitment. We also included in the budget over $110 million to support the reintegration of previously incarcerated Indigenous people and advance restorative justice approaches. And we've introduced, as you know, Bill C-56 on administrative segregation. As you can see, we are focused on ensuring that federal correctional institutions provide safe and secure environments conducive to inmate rehabilitation, staff safety, and the protection of the public. Mr. Chair, it's a big portfolio, lots of detail. I'll leave the detail with that and look forward to the next period with some questions.
Thank you, Minister. Our first round of 7 minutes goes to Mr. Spiegelman.
Chair, thank you very much, Minister Goodale. Good to have you with us, along with your senior staff. Thank you for taking the time. I would like to echo you personally and on behalf of my constituents in Mississauga Lakeshore in expressing my condolences on the death of Constable Davidson, to his family, to his colleagues, to his friends. Mr. Chair, this is a year that has been marked by several tragedies, attacks within or against faith-based communities, beginning with the shooting in St. Foy in Quebec City earlier this year and ending most recently with the tragedy in Sutherland Springs in Texas. And Minister Goodale, you've had the opportunity to address the committee on this issue before. It's an important issue. My community in Mississauga Lakeshore has a very active faith-based dialogue at the moment that my colleagues and I are engaged in, along with faith leaders. And the security infrastructure program is one that remains of interest to many faith leaders, specifically Jewish and Muslim, but not limited to them. Could you give the committee an update on the interest in this program, the recent expansion of this program, and where you see it heading in the months and years ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Spiegelman. The program that you're referring to, the security infrastructure program, began several years ago, and I think it's fair to say it began on a modest and experimental basis to see if this was a valuable thing for governments to invest in, identifying community groups and organizations, often religious-based or culturally based, other minorities that feel themselves vulnerable, like the LGBTQ community as well. And it became clear that there was a very real need for this program to help the communities to identify their vulnerabilities and then better protect their facilities. As a result of our analysis of the small program that had begun, we felt it was justified to expand that program. So we broadened the criteria. We regularized the intake process for applications so that they occur twice annually on a regular cycle, and that the funding can be used for a broader range of security activities. And we've gone through now 2 cycles of intake for applications, and I think it's fair to say that the program is fully subscribed, if not oversubscribed. A great many communities are making very good use of this funding to improve their security, whether that's fencing or closed-circuit television or lighting or protective materials on windows and so forth, or training their own folks on how to deal with security issues. It's been very well received. Announcements have been made across the country to a broad range of groups and organizations. We will be monitoring the benefits of the investments to measure as much as we can how well those investments have served the community. But so far, all of the signals are very positive, except for the fact that it's probably oversubscribed, which is a good sign.
Thank you very much, Minister. Keeping our community safe is one part of the equation. You're also involved in work to counter radicalization to extremism. And on that front, I wanted to ask you a question. I've recently had the opportunity to attend the 137th Annual Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union in St. Petersburg, Russia. And the assembly, comprised of 156 nations, passed a resolution that is a declaration on promoting cultural pluralism and peace through interfaith and inter-ethnic dialogue. And as I mentioned, my city of Mississauga is currently engaged in a very active interfaith dialogue alongside members of Parliament, my colleagues. How does interfaith dialogue and greater cultural understanding intersect with the work that your department is doing through the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence?
Well, it's a critical part of the whole effort, Mr. Spangeman. Every time we can get people from that vast Canadian mosaic to sit down with each other and learn more about each other and develop relationships with each other, broaden understanding, reach out and work together. All of that makes our society just that much stronger. So the work of the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and the Prevention of Violence is working with a broad variety of experts and agencies, academics and community organizations across the country to encourage higher levels of understanding, and also to do the hard work of identifying the factors that lead to radicalization, to violence, and the kinds of steps that can be taken to intervene in the right way with the right people at the right time before the fact to try to head off tragedies before they happen. Will that succeed in every case? Obviously not, but it's an endeavor that is well worth undertaking. So what your faith-based groups are doing is a natural complement to what the Canada Centre would be promoting and encouraging. And I would also note that within the department, we also have the cross-cultural roundtable on security. Consists of about 15 representatives of various ethnocultural organizations across the country that come together on a periodic basis to learn about how our security systems function and to offer advice or to raise issues or concerns where they think there may be some issues to resolve. There was just a meeting of the cross-cultural roundtable last weekend, and it was a very useful session.
Thank you, Mr. Spangeman. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Motts, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chair, and I want to echo the comments of the Minister and Mr. Spangeman with regards to the condolences of Constable Davidson's family and his friends, and to the policing community in Abbotsford, as well as the policing community across this nation. Thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here, and your officials for being here. I want to just focus part of this, my questions, on the immigration end of things in CBSA. Your government is committed to admitting nearly 1 million immigrants in the next 3 years. We've seen the impacts of the Syrian refugee, the Operation Syrian Refugee. We've seen the impacts of this past year with the illegal border crossers. And Mr. Minister, you and I had some conversation at the Joint Committee, or at the Immigration Committee earlier this fall, where when I suggested that the illegal border crossers were causing significant pressures on staff, that the interview times had been reduced, that people weren't showing up for secondary interviews, that people weren't being located across the country, and that people were disappearing and not being able to be found. It caused some consternation, and people were curious as to, is the public safety at risk? And you assured Canadians that that public safety and national security was never at risk. But although I would like to believe you, I think I'm not naive enough to suggest that that's completely the case. CBSA frontline officers aren't completely convinced of that, neither are some of the Canadian public. And I guess sometimes past behavior is a predicator of future behavior. And if I look at the the audit of the Operation Syrian Refugee, the CBSA's internal screening of that, there's the redacted version that's been posted online, and I've learned from those who have access to the unredacted version, there's some things that are somewhat troubling in there, that screening times have been reduced from 30 days down to 96 hours, that security screening was not done or not done properly in a number of those cases, that sometimes open source for screening was in fact social media, which was redacted from the document. The audit recognizes that there were extreme pressures placed on the teams involved in Operation Syrian Refugee, and that resources were working numerous hours of overtime in order to ensure the operation's success. And what's troubling is removed from the report was the sentence that says there is a risk that the processing of Syrian refugees did not comply with key legislation or ORSR program, which is the Operation Syrian Refugee Program Delivery Instructions. Now, if that's the case from their own internal audit, I guess my question is, we do know that the illegal border crossers have caused wait time or interview times to reduce from the normal 8 hours down to under 2. That question 2 on the form when you come into the country is, why are you seeking asylum in Canada, isn't even being asked. And so with those things happening, and we're expecting Canada is expecting to have, some reports suggest, 250,000 more illegal border crossers are attempting. And I guess my question boils down to is, where are you expecting the resources to come from in addressing both the increased levels of immigration as well as the increased levels of illegal border crossers? Because frontline officers are telling us that it is having an impact on the normal flow of legal immigrants into this country. My staff tell me, and other MP staff tell them, that the normal processes are backlogged significantly. And I'm just curious to know, in your budgets, where are the resources going to come from to try and meet the demands that we are being faced both with the legal immigration process as well as the illegal immigration process?
We're down to about 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Mott, two things. First of all, many of your comments were with respect to the Syrian project at the beginning of 2016. And that project, as you point out, was a very large humanitarian effort, and it was undertaken in a very short time frame. In order to accomplish that objective of bringing that number of people out of the risk that they were in Syria and bring them to Canada, we put together a security screening system that was designed by Immigration and Refugees Canada, the CBSA, the RCMP, and CSIS. And I, through that period of time, was constantly in touch with the heads of all of those organizations to be assured that the screening system was strong and appropriate to meet that challenge. And I remember specifically asking the director of CSIS and the commissioner of the RCMP, is this sound and solid, and will it work? And their answer in both cases was yes. In fact, they offered that at a news conference at the very beginning of the process to say they were satisfied with the security elements that we had put in place to be able to do this humanitarian project and to do it safely.
I guess I asked the question again is, we know the pressures are there. We've heard from witnesses that they are under enormous pressure with the current regime of illegal border crossers. And I just don't know where the resources will come from. And I don't see
They're not in supplementary B. That's not a part of this request. But as you know, under the parliamentary process, there are several series of supplementary estimates that come forward when they're required. You can be assured that these agencies, IRCC, CSIS, RCMP, CBSA, are constantly monitoring their resources, especially in relation to the border issues. To the extent that it is feasible, they reallocate and reassign within their existing budgets. When they need more, they are not bashful, let me assure you of that, of coming to ministers and asking for further subs to be included, and then we go to Parliament and ask for the exact numbers.
Nor are the rest of us. Thank you, Mr. Motz. Mr. Dubé.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, and thank you for being here, and to the different agency heads and officials, thank you as well. I just want to go back to an issue I've raised with you before, Minister, in the House with regards to the current workplace climate that exists at CSIS and the lawsuit that is ongoing. And the last time I had the opportunity to ask you about it, you of course mentioned how seriously this was taken and that you would get to the bottom of things, which seems to me to contradict the submission that's been made by CSIS, essentially brushing away these allegations, saying the case should be thrown out, that there's no merit to it, or that the allegations were dealt with appropriately. And connecting that with the report the summary of which was released by Mr. Vigneault, and where that essentially says there is an issue where employees do feel that management is not being accountable to these very serious allegations. So the first thing I'll do is, of course, renew the call that I believe there should be an investigation into this more broadly speaking. And I just want to hear from you how you square the circle of, on the one hand, stating to us that these are very serious allegations, on the other hand, a submission in court stating that they have no merit and that the case should be thrown out.
First of all, Mr. Dubé, thank you for raising the issue, and I know that you take this very seriously, and I appreciate that. That's part of our parliamentary accountability process. When this issue first emerged, it was the new director of CSIS that was on the phone immediately to me to tell me what he was learning about that particular situation, and making his view abundantly clear that without having investigated it yet, if the description that was emerging was in fact true and accurate, it was a situation that was unacceptable and needed quick and effective correction. And I believe very sincerely that Mr. Vigneault takes this subject matter with great seriousness and is taking all the necessary steps to get to the bottom of it as quickly as possible, and to do what is necessary to remedy the situation. Can I just add one sentence? Go ahead. One part of why it is difficult to provide elaborate commentary about this in the public arena is because there are legal proceedings underway. And while other participants in the legal proceedings are free to comment, we aren't. Mm-hmm. That's part of our dilemma. There are things perhaps we might like to say,
which is part of the challenge
says,
that I
not
have
now.
When I see the submission that essentially says the claims have no merit. If that's all we have to go on and nothing can be added to that, then essentially what that says is that the allegations are being argued to be untrue. Or,
Well, in the adversarial, our judicial system, our legal system in court is an adversarial
Sure,
system.
Minister, I understand that. My issue
each
is...
side says a lot of things in order to make their point.
I understand that, Minister.
But the case
There's
has
also
only
the
just begun.
possibility to settle should the allegations be found to be true, and instead of putting these folks through this process. So I think that's an important point. But I appreciate
there are steps underway.
I appreciate the crash course on our judicial system. I do want to ask. I do want to ask you though. Once again, the notion of investigating this behavior more broadly beyond the allegations being made in this court case, I believe is of the utmost importance, and I hope you'll share this sentiment with me, because the fact of the matter is, if there's allegations of things like Islamophobia, for example, and those communities are working with CSIS on a variety of public safety issues, that has, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure members of the committee and Canadians more broadly, that's deeply concerning. So that's why I ask, will you initiate an investigation to ensure that this type of discrimination and behavior is not seeping into any work being done by any individual bad apples, though they may be in the agency?
I will take every step that is necessary to make sure that the essential work of CSIS in defense of Canadian safety and in defense of Canadians' rights and freedoms is not in any way compromised. We're at the beginning of a process. Mr. Dubé, bear with us. I think your objectives and ours are very much the same.
We'll likely have a chance to talk about it again. I just want to, with the time that's left, go back to another topic we've had a chance to debate in the House recently, and that's the no-fly list. And of course, we can debate the legislation and the changes that are part of C-59. But once again, I just want to, on behalf of the families who are here in Ottawa on Monday, once again ask you when we will see the money for that redress system, because beyond the legislative changes, which have merit, I will agree with you on that, the funds are required in order to put the system in place. That would be my first question, when we'll see that money. And the second question is, where the dollar amount that's been floated out there, it's escaping me, the 78 million or whatnot that was brought out at one point, where that amount comes from, and what you see as the costs being associated with when it comes to putting that system in place.
Mr. Dubé, we need legislation, we need regulations, we need an entirely redesigned IT system, because this one was put together, in my opinion, backwards about 7 or 8 years ago.
So will we see that money in the budget?
It will cost money. They're not in these estimates, but as I said before to Mr. Mott, estimates come before the House on a regular basis, and when we're in a position to put an actual figure on it, and I won't comment on the media speculation about what the number is, we'll get there. The objective is to have an interactive system so that when a false positive occurs once, a person will get a clearance number, and then they will be able to use that number to avoid the problem in future use of airline travel.
Thank you, Mr. Dubé. Thank you, Minister. Mr. Picard, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Monsieur le ministre.
Thank you, Minister, colleagues. As you know, at the current time, okay. As you know, at the present time, we're reviewing the First Nations situation in the prison system. So the representation of First Nations people incarcerated and the proportions in which they are incarcerated is alarming. And the comment that we've heard during the first meetings of the committee are quite concerning as well, on the challenges, on the increased proportions. And Dr. Zinger was saying that the solutions do exist, but they're very difficult to reach because the task is quite complex. I'd like to know what the initiatives are with regards to the First Nations in the carceral or in the prison system.
Mr. Picard, thank you. This is an issue that goes right back to the mandate letter that I received and a number of other ministers received about finding better solutions for dealing with the experiences of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system. And when you look at the numbers in the federal correctional system, while Indigenous people make up 4 to 5% of the general population of Canada, they make up about 27% of the people who are incarcerated in the federal system, and I think over 35% in the case of women. So it's a serious problem, and while the correctional system cannot deal with the intake of Indigenous people, that's up to those who take previous steps in the judicial process, and my colleague, the Attorney General, and Minister Bennett and Minister Philpott are focused upon those issues. Once a person arrives in the correctional system, the objective is to try our best to work with them and prepare them for a successful release from the system. And of course, the vast majority of people do emerge from the system at some point. The critical question for public safety is, are they ready and prepared to take up productive lives without further offending? So this funding that was identified in the budget, about $110 million altogether, is intended to address the pre-release preparation for Indigenous people, to make sure that they have the opportunities that are culturally appropriate to rehabilitate themselves and get ready for their release in ways that make sense from their cultural perspective. And then part of the money as well is, once release has happened and they have an opportunity for parole, do they have access to the services and the support systems at that point after release to make sure that the release is successful and they don't find themselves reoffending and back into the system once again. The correctional investigator has looked at the statistics and has concluded that, generally speaking, we do a better job of that process for non-Aboriginal people than for Aboriginal people. So the investment that was announced in the last budget, consistent with the mandate letter, was intended to try to enhance our capacity to deal more effectively with Indigenous offenders so that they can be rehabilitated more successfully, released appropriately, and then in their parole period, having the kinds of experiences that will ensure that they are not in a position to reoffend again.
Thank you. Dans le cadre c'est une grosse année, je pense, pour la sécurité.
This is a big, it's quite a week of, quite a year for security. We have the National Framework on Security. There are many efforts, there are many things that are being done in order to reinforce our national security framework, and we hear general comments saying that there is concerns with regards to security, and there's a super circ that we hear about, and we talk about pre-clearance. So we would like to hear about the scope of this new security organization, and does this fill an important gap with regards to national security?
Yes, it will. And let me, first of all, Mr. Picard, congratulate Parliament and this committee specifically. A few different players before, but this committee that did the heavy lifting on Bill C-22. And we now have the new committee of parliamentarians, which has passed through all stages in Parliament. And yesterday the announcement was made or Monday, I guess it was, the announcement was made of the formation of the committee and the members of Parliament and Senate that will be participating in the committee. Brand new aspect of Canada's national security and intelligence infrastructure in place for the first time. In addition to that, we now have Bill C-59, which you referred to, Mr. Picard, which again enhances our national security and intelligence architecture. It clarifies a number of the powers and authorities of various agencies, including CSIS. There had been reports from the federal court, from commissions of inquiry, from the Security Intelligence Review Committee and others, saying that there were doubts or there were ambiguities in the authorities of our various agencies that needed to be clarified. In a field like national security, you don't want a lot of gray areas. So the law brings that clarity. The new proposal in C-59 brings that clarity in a number of areas with respect to what our agencies can and cannot do. It also establishes new review and oversight mechanisms, including two things in particular. It's an elaborate structure.
Minister, you're going to have to get onto those two things in another question, because Mr. Picard's time is up.
All right. I'd be glad to do it.
Yes. Madame Leach, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And I think, as has been expressed already, we all share our condolences with the family of Constable Davidson and his family. Minister Goodale, my questions will focus on drug-related issues. In the estimates, they're seeking of $20 million for drug-impaired driving. What percentage of this is actually being directed specifically to frontline officers so that they can deal with this issue?
We can get you the exact breakdown, Ms. Leach.
And that's fine.
There are just two or three elements that I would summarize. Training is part of it for field sobriety officers and for drug recognition experts. We need to train more of them to be in the system, looking, roughly speaking, to double the number that exists today across the country. So training is part of it, and another key part of it is investing in the equipment, the roadside testing equipment that is new, and we need to acquire that equipment so it's available to police officers in the field.
Right. So also outlined in that $20 million is $1.4 million for administration. I'd like to ask why that's not being placed with frontline workers. What is it being utilized for?
I'm sure our officials can describe the administrative, but you obviously do need at least a little bit of the funding to run the program.
Now, I think we all know that this is a serious issue, and to your point, Minister, whether it be research, making sure that appropriate training is in place for frontline workers, whether that be the equipment they need to do their jobs, I will ask you if you can please table that. One of the other items that's been raised is the number, so 6,000, my understanding is about 6,000 new officers, and some of that training to be done potentially in the United States. I'm not sure if it's not available in Canada, but when you do the breakdown of the numbers, it's about $25 per day for a 100-day course. I can do math, unlike how the Minister of Finance seemed to think the member from Milton can't. The fact of the matter is that I don't think we can train our officers to be able to do exactly what we need them to do for $25 a day. And so I'm not really sure how we got to that number based on training 6,000 individuals.
Ms. Leach, as I've said in response to other questions, not all of our financial asks are in these estimates. And there will be further estimates coming forward. Our total commitment that we've announced so far is in support of Bill C-45 and C-46 is $274 million. And to this stage, of that, about 161 million is focused on the needs with respect to C-46. This is the first installment. There will be more.
Okay, we look forward to you tabling all of those so that we have an idea of how you are supporting the RCMP and our frontline workers. My other question has to do with cannabis and the relationship with Bill C-45. We know that importation, exportation of cannabis in the past was illegal. In the new legislation, it's still illegal. What is the purpose then of the over $3 million to deal with this issue in the current supplementary estimates if the law hasn't changed?
Well, the various analysts, including the Auditor General, have pointed from time to time to the need to improve our interdiction capacity at the border. There have been several comments made by the Auditor General in that regard. We've also, as you know, given in Bill C-37 the new authority to intensify inspections. Previously, inspections applied to items that were over 30 grams. Now we have the capacity to inspect under 30 grams.
And I have one more question.
And
for
that's
the
where
minister.
let me just say, that's where the fentanyl comes in, because a pack of 30 grams contains enough opioid to kill 15,000 people.
So my last question has to do with your public education allocation, the $2.5 million. My question really is that if that's to educate young people, as you stated previously, why is it that we're allowing in Bill C-45 children aged 12 to 18 to actually possess? If we didn't allow them to possess in that piece of legislation, wouldn't your public education issue with respect to driving and use of this drug be irrelevant? And also with that, in the Bill C-46, which contains provisions about random testing for alcohol, why are other drugs not included in that bill?
Minister, Ms. Leach has left you no time to respond to that question, so...
Oh, I would dearly love to,
I
Mr.
bet you
Chair.
would. I'll bet you would. Ms. DeBruzen. Oh, sorry, Damoff. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Minister, thank you for being with us again today. You and I have spoken in the past, as has this committee, that sexual harassment in the workplace is simply unacceptable anywhere. And we've all been troubled when we read stories about places like the RCMP or corrections where it is still occurring. And I just wondered, certainly there's new legislation that the government just tabled on harassment in the workplace, and I know you have been seized with this issue as minister. So there's two aspects. One is legislation, what we're doing about it, and also I just have to comment, as wonderful as it is to see Ms. Kelly here again. She remains the only woman at the table, and we know that changing the culture in all of the departments is critical, and having more women in leadership positions, it's critical to changing the culture within the whole organization. So I just wondered if you could speak to the legislation as well as what we're doing to attract more women and retaining them in positions of leadership in public safety.
It's a very good point, Ms. Damoff. One of the things, though, that I immediately observed when I arrived in this portfolio now 2 years ago is actually the number of women within public safety who are in very senior positions. My former Associate Deputy Minister, for example, Gina Wilson, was, I think, the most senior Indigenous woman in the public service. As you know, she's now gone on to be the Deputy Minister at Status of Women, and I've lost her from this table. But two of my ADMs are women. There are very senior women in the highest ranks of the RCMP. In my hometown of Regina, Brenda Lucky, Assistant Commissioner, is the commanding officer at Depot, for example, in charge of all of the training for RCMP officers across the country. My deputy reminds me I have 4 ADMs that are they're women, not just 2. So I hear your point. I mean, we really do need to continue to focus on that, and I'm sure you'll see that reflected as the public service promotion decisions are made in the future. But on the issue of harassment, whether it's in the RCMP or in CSIS or the Correctional Service or any other part of my portfolio, it is abundantly clear to the entire portfolio that behavior is unacceptable. And that we have to work together in a concerted way to demonstrate that there's just no tolerance for this sort of thing. That when incidents happen, they must be very thoroughly and professionally investigated. There must be consequences for the behavior that caused or contributed to the harassment. That the victims need to be properly supported, and handled in such a way that they're not discouraged or intimidated from bringing forward their complaints or concerns. And then there need to be the long-term plans to make sure that this behavior is rooted out and prevented from happening in the future. Will we ever have absolute perfection? Sadly, given human nature, I suspect we won't. But we will have to make it absolutely clear throughout the portfolio, throughout the department, and indeed in every aspect of government, which I think is the purpose of the legislation that was introduced by my colleague Patty Haiju earlier this week, that this is a priority. We are in 2017. And people have every right to expect that their workplace will be safe, healthy, and respectful. And that has to be priority number one for all of us.
Thank you, Minister. I think I have 30 seconds left. So did you want to make a comment on the previous question? If you don't, that's fine.
I don't think I could do it justice in 30 seconds. But I suspect it will be coming back.
In my last 10 seconds, I wanted to thank you for joining Minister Wilson-Raybould and yourself, joining me at the recent 30th anniversary of MAD Canada's Red Ribbon campaign, and give them a shout out and encourage everyone to practice sober and safe driving over the holiday season. Thank you, Minister.
They do amazingly good work. Thank you.
Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Goodall. We don't have much time, so I'm going to go through this rapidly. October 30th, a 50-year-old woman detained by CBS orders in a maximum security jail in Milton passed away. We learned this from the media, who learned it from a brief news release from the agency. The agency, was the power to arrest and jail non-citizens, would not disclose a woman's identity, country of origin, or cause of death. It is our understanding that detainees are under 24/7 observation while in custody. So 7 quick questions, sir. When did this woman enter Canada? Where did she enter Canada? Which agency first detained her? Was this death a result of shortage of staff? Did someone drop the ball? Why the big secret? And when can we expect this information?
The secret at the moment, Mr. Van Kesteren, is simply because it's under investigation. And when it has been appropriately investigated, and as you note, the agency itself announced that the incident had happened, triggered all of the appropriate investigative steps, and those steps are underway. And when the investigation is completed, the appropriate public commentary will be made available. But let me just say that detention, immigration detention, is something we've been working on very hard for the last year and a half.
Mr. Goodall, with all due respect, sir, I've got some other questions, and I know that
well, if you don't want the answer, that's fine.
Well, no, I wanted those answers, and if you're not able to give those to me...
It's being investigated, okay. Mr. Van Kesteren. Police do this sort of thing?
Okay. Well, I'd like to go to another question, and you opened the door, and Ms. Leach walked through, so I'm going to go through that as well. So I have in my hands here a document from Health Canada that talks about consumer information on cannabis. Amongst other things, it states that using cannabis or any cannabis product can impair your concentration, your ability to think and make decisions, and your reaction time and coordination. This may affect your motor skills, including your ability to drive. It can also increase anxiety, cause panic attacks, and in other cases cause paranoia and hallucinations. There's also a segment here that says when the product should not be used. Right on the top, if you're under the age of 25. So my question, sir, is the minister in charge of our public safety and national security, how can you stand by and allow C-45 to be passed?
Because, Mr. Van Kesteren, in the very best and carefulest of consideration and judgment, Bill C-45 and Bill C-46 with it will give Canada the better chance to deal with the very issues that you've referred to than the existing law. The existing law has failed. The existing law has resulted in a situation where Canadian young people are the heaviest users of marijuana in the Western world.
This is going to slow down that usage?
Indeed, it has a better chance than the existing law. We're spending $2 billion a year trying to enforce a law that doesn't work.
Your own police officers are warning you not to do this. The RCMP, I can give you stacks of letters from former and retired that are begging us, don't do this. How can you ignore all that advice?
There is some advice that disagrees, Mr. Van Kesteren, but if you look at the results of the task force that investigated this issue for the better part of last year, talked to everyone, including the medical experts, the legal experts, the international experience.
How much time do I have left?
The task force demonstrated that what's embodied in 46 and embodied in 45 is the best way forward, and it has a greater likelihood to be successful than the law you endorse, which has failed.
So, Minister Goodale, let's be very clear. The Canadian Medical Association presented evidence that at the least the age 21 should be observed as when an individual should be able to use and possess. Your law is very clear, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but my understanding is that individuals 12 to 21 will be allowed to possess. Please explain to us then why you are stating that my colleagues as physicians have stated otherwise. They're on the record as saying age 21. You've placed in your bill 12 to 18. Where is the evidence being utilized in your bill?
We're not in this bill changing the age of majority. It remains at 18, but provinces have the authority, if they believe it's appropriate, to vary that age if they think that is appropriate. But the federal law is not changing the age of majority.
As
No, it's changing
reluctant
the age
as
of
I
possession.
am to end this round of questioning, Mr. Fragiscatos, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. Mr. Mott's raised fears over asylum seekers attempting to enter Canada illegally. The University of Calgary, which to my knowledge is not a friend of the Liberal Party, has put together information based on analysis of IRCC data that I think puts things into context. In 2017, it's expected that Canada will have 36,000 individuals trying to enter Canada at our borders illegally. In 2008, however, that number was 37,000. In the year 2000, that number was 38,000. And in the year 2001, that number was 45,000. So what that says to me is that we have dealt with these challenges before, and I believe we're in a position to deal with these challenges again, but I want you to comment on that, sir.
That's some very useful context and history. And in fact, those numbers, I don't have the chart in front of me, but those numbers are broadly correct. We have dealt with numbers in this order of magnitude in the past. And our agencies, whether it's CBSA or the RCMP or IRCC, have taken the steps that are necessary to put the resources in place to deal with the flow, and it ebbs and flows. There have been some years as low as a couple of thousand, and some years as high as 40,000. This year, it's obviously at the high end of that spectrum. We'll see what the number finally arrives at when we get to December 31st. But our officials working at the border have done extraordinary work this year and in previous years to make sure they can do two things: to enforce effectively every Canadian law, which they have done, and secondly, to make sure that we respect Canada's international obligations at the border with respect to asylum seekers and potential refugees. And the UN High Commissioner for Refugees was just in town earlier this week and was very positive about the manner in which Canada has shown real international leadership in dealing with a very difficult problem.
In my community, thank you very much. In my community of London North Centre, we have the Ontario headquarters of the RCMP. And you mentioned at the outset that between 2011 and 2015, the RCMP suffered deep cuts. Can you go into the nature of the cuts and how the money that your department is requesting, how that will be put to use? The impact that the cuts made?
Well, it's it's a serious problem of financial erosion over time, and it's also escalating demands upon the RCMP. This is a unique and really extraordinary police force. Unique in all the world because of all of the various things that it's called upon to do. It's the federal police force. It provides national policing services to other police forces. In some parts of the country, it is the provincial police force. It's also in some places the local municipal police force. And it has international obligations for national security. It's our entree into Interpol and so forth. No other policing organization in the world has that breadth of responsibility. And we manage to lard on more and more expectations all the time. So the funding is aimed at addressing the erosion right across the system. As I mentioned, one of the things we're doing is accelerating recruitment, bringing new officers into the force, partly because there has been the natural baby boomer attrition, and those people who are reaching that age leave the force. We need to make sure that our compensation is as competitive as it can be to make the force an attractive place. Part of it is going toward paying for the salary improvements that we announced earlier in the year. It's every dimension of the force to make sure it's properly resourced. My own view is this is the first installment. There needs to be more to come.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos, and I see that it's 9:45 and the minister does need to leave, so I'm going to suspend. On behalf of the committee, I wanted to thank you for your appearance here today, Minister Goodale.
Thank you, Mr.
Meeting
Chairman.
suspended. On. We now have the officials. We are under some time constraints in that I'd like to call for the vote at the end of the meeting. So my intention is to end questioning at 9:40. And I just, we had a pretty free-ranging discussion earlier for the first hour. I just, colleagues, humor the chair and try to tie your questions to the supplements. Just what a novel idea that would be. Yeah, I know. And I just also caution that there is some constraints on officials with respect to public policy. So with that, I think we'll start a new round of questioning. And is that Ms. DeBruzen? Yes. Madam DeBruzen, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. So I'm actually going to tie it directly to the SUPBs because I was reading through it and I found many items that were very interesting, particularly because we are now looking at Indigenous incarceration rights, but there are many issues within these SUPBs touching upon Indigenous communities as a whole, not just the incarceration piece. And I was wondering if I could start with the First Nations policing program. I see that there's additional funding in here for the First Nations policing program. Maybe if you can give me an idea of where are we at with First Nations policing? What are our successes? What are the challenges going forward? And what are we doing to address those?
So I'll start and then perhaps share some with some of our response with Gilles. There has been, the government's undertaken a review, the consultation process with Indigenous communities across the country. The budget announced funding, additional funding for First Nations policing. The minister has continued, I would say, to meet with and engage, and the department has continued to engage with communities. There's a lot of interest in a variety of issues, including the level of compensation, capacity building, training, and there is, I'll be very frank, many communities would like to see an expansion of services as well. That's all, frankly,
Is that what
expansion of services, either in communities where the service is already provided or in communities where there is the First Nations policing program is not yet present. The government is considering, continues to consider how to respond to those needs, but I think they're quite well documented, and there's an important first tranche of it, I would say, in the 2017 budget, and there are, as a consequence, there are other elements, as you had mentioned, in the SUPs. Gilles, do you want to add?
So maybe just to add to that, the RSMP continues to be engaged with the communities, in all communities that we serve. We're also fully engaged with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous review that's ongoing right now. and ensuring that we have that tight bond with the community and continue to support them.
All right. So when you talk about expansion of services, are there new First Nations policing programs being established as part of these?
No, I was just describing actually what the sort of the feedback from the consultation process. There is, I think, any objective observer would say that there are communities that are underserviced, and that's a policy decision the government's going to have to deal with in the going forward. And there are also issues around the level of servicing in some communities.
Thank you. Another item that I was looking at that caught my interest was respect to the Métis Nation, and I'm looking for it now. There was funding to support Métis rights and Métis relationships with the federal government, which is within here with the RCMP. And I was wondering specifically what are the issues that you're seeking to address in supporting Métis rights and Métis relationships? Is this in relation to the Daniels decision? What is there that is expected from that funding?
So from the funding itself, we're funding coordinators in Métis communities across the country, and it's basically to build that bridge with the communities to understand what their needs are and how we can help. We've received, those coordinators have been in place for a period of time now, and we've received some very positive feedback from the communities in which we're operating in right now.
Okay, thanks. In the course of our study on Indigenous incarceration, one of the issues that's come up a few times is differential funding for Section 81 healing lodges. And my question is, there's funding in these sub-Bs that goes to issues concerning Indigenous incarceration. Does any of that money go to start equalizing the funding between Section 81 lodges and the ones that are run by the correctional services?
Do you want to start? Do you want to answer the specific question, and I can then talk? There is funding. I think it's important that Anne reply to your specific question, and I can describe what the funding is for community-based reintegration of Indigenous, for the incarceration of Indigenous offenders. So.
Well, in terms of the healing lodges, it's like I mentioned at last week's committee. Right now, what we've done is we've created a stronger agreement framework in consultation, actually, with current Section 81 agreement holders. We've also revised a formula for funding that recognizes the unique requirements of different healing lodges, their size, and where they're located. And actually, just a few weeks ago, we actually entered into a new agreement with Wesseskin Healing Lodge in Quebec, and we received a letter from them, actually, how appreciative they were of the new framework and the revised formula.
All right. But specifically to the question then of equalizing funding, just because that seems to be an issue that has come up a few times when I've looked at the investigators' reports and the like. Does any of that help to get us towards equalizing that funding?
In a little less than 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Well, it's actually the revised funding formula. Again, it's negotiations between CSC and the Indigenous, agreement holders, and yes, it is going to assist.
Thank you, Ms. DeBruze. And Mr. Mott, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to officials for being here. In May of this year, the current government received a letter from business associations. I guess this question will be directed to you, Mr. Hill, with regards to CBSA. And these business association raised the issue that the CBSA IT problems, along with staffing shortfalls at official ports of entry. Since that time, we've learned that the Advanced Commercial Information System has suffered more than 200 outages in the last 2 years. As well, that the CBSA staff are being moved from official ports of entry to where they ensure the regular flow of goods and services and people to unofficial ports of entry to process illegal border crossers and the illegal border crossers, and it was causing delays. So I guess my question back is, what has your department done to address the concerns that were raised earlier this year, both with respect to the IT issues as well as the staffing shortages?
Thank you very much for the question. The agency has a number of consultation mechanisms, in particular the Border Commercial Consultative Committee, where we have representation from the senior leadership from our many closest industry stakeholders. And the particular pressures that arose as a result of the outages that you're speaking to was the focus of a discussion with that group, where the agency and my colleagues from our Information Science and Technology branch addressed the issues and clarified exactly why the issues were arising. It had to do with a change in practice from some of the industries where they were putting multiple pieces of information on manifests that had not been the case, that had not been part of the design of the new IT system. And so we resorted to a manual process for an interim period in collaboration with the stakeholders to address the issue. The issue has been addressed, and the functioning of the system is now smooth.
So what about the staffing issues? What about moving border guards, CBSA, frontline officers from ports of entry, legal ports of entry, normal ports of entry, to illegal border crossing locations to process people there and the backlog it's causing?
The agency, is quite adept at being agile in order to address the irregular flow. So the agency, working in collaboration with our partners at the RCMP, Immigration, and Public Safety, are taking a whole-of-government approach. So we've established a pool of resources with the qualifications that can be moved from one region to another region in order to surge our capacity to ensure that the management of this irregular flow is orderly. So that is being done. It is being managed effectively, and we will continue to do so to meet the need to ensure that the border is managed effectively.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I do appreciate that it's not CBSA's issue or a fault, if you will, that the illegal border crossing is still allowed to occur. You are responsible to manage that, and I respect that and appreciate your comments. I think it's important to recognize, though, that the frontline officers are telling us a different story, that there is significant touch points at legal points of entry, as well as the pressure to process individuals at the illegal ports of entry. And so I'm just curious to know, I guess both from the RCMP and from you, how many officers have been moved across the country to deal with this wave in 2017 of border crossers, and how many of your resources are you anticipating to move for the second wave that this country is anticipating in the near future?
I'd be pleased to follow up to give you the exact number of officers that we've moved. With respect to your second question, the agency, again, with our partners in a whole-of-government approach, is well advanced in terms of its contingency planning, so that we feel quite prepared in the eventuality that there's a surge in irregular claimants in the future, and then we would act accordingly to address that flow of irregular migrants in the event that it materializes.
Michelle?
Just to add to Peter's comments, from an RCMP perspective as well, I would need to go back to make sure around the exact numbers. But that's the business that we're in, that it be wildfires, that it be the border, that it be significant issues that develop over the course of a year. it's reassigning the resources that are required to the highest threats and where the pressures are. So we'll continue to do those assessments and basically work towards making sure that we have enough resources to deal with the issue.
So, thank you. And as Mr. Hill indicated, can you provide in writing to the committee the reallocation of resources? How many of those from both CBSA and RCMP to deal with the illegal border crossers, and the attached costs to that as well, if you would please?
Yeah, we could maybe just for precision, like because we've reassigned resources not just in Lacal, but also in Manitoba and in British Columbia, so the national picture.
Thank you. You know what? I'm going to be generous with my 30 seconds because I exceeded last time and passed it over.
Yeah, I appreciate the nobility, Mr. Motz.
Well, I know how much you are.
Yes,
Stickler for time,
yes,
sir.
yes. Mr. Dubé, 7 minutes, please.
Merci. Pardon, monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps a question either for Mr. Brown or Mr. Hill with regards to the amount that is being granted for the framework around marijuana legalization. In this context, I was wondering if, in addition to these monies and the discussion that you might have had with your American counterparts with regards to people who would cross the border who might have consumed marijuana, the questions that are asked, I understand that we cannot change American laws, but there is a concern that an activity that will soon be legal in Canada might have an impact on these individuals who would like to cross the border if they're asked by an American border crossing agent, and how are we going to ensure fluidity at the border for Canadians that may have simply have done something that might be legal in their country. Perhaps I can begin. I can share the microphone with Peter.
I think the minister's been clear on this question, and I think recognizing, as you say, every country has the right to establish the standards around which it lets anyone into their country. And so it wouldn't be, frankly, appropriate for us to counsel the U.S. about changing their approach in the same way it's probably not appropriate for them to counsel us on our approach on any of the issues that we've discussed today or might discuss in the future about entry decisions that are made by the Government of Canada. I will say, though, that we do, on a regular basis, make our American counterparts, they're well briefed. These are issues that are discussed at the highest levels with DHS, so they understand the approach, and we're continuing to encourage them to, as they do with us, to be as welcoming and supportive of Canadians crossing the border into the U.S. as we try to be generally with Americans coming into Canada. I'll turn to Peter on the specifics if you want, just setting the broader stage that I think the minister's been on the record on quite clearly.
So thank you. Yes, so the agency through SUPS-B is requesting $3 million to implement and administer the new federal framework to legalize and strictly regulate cannabis. And the funding is going to several specific areas, including support to our port of entry and border service officers at the front line for their questioning and interdiction. There will be communications through social media and a digital approach to ensure that travelers are aware of the new legislation and the requirements. We're also providing some funding to our laboratory for it to conduct the analysis with respect to cannabis or cannabis-related products. And we do also have some funding to ensure that we can track and report our performance under this new framework. I would say that in terms of communication, that will include signage at our major ports of entry. And at the ports of entry also, we'll be introducing a mandatory question with respect to the cannabis legislation. So hopefully that answers your question.
Monsieur Michaud.
Thank you, Mr. Michaud. Let's change subject. Let's go to the RCMP. Now this issue of the $60.1 million for readjusting to the pay scale. What does this include? This includes retroactive pay on the salary increase that was granted to the regular members of the RCMP for the past 2 years. So this is the exact amount. Are there any other amounts, any other expenses expected? Because we have discussions with regards to the implementation of C7 and the things that are happening right now. The will to become unionized from the members. Yes, this has to be negotiated between the government and the new association. Thank you. Now, last subject. Fine. Now, with regards to the Parliamentarians Committee, we have the first amount that has been granted in these estimates. And so the long-term plan, what is a long-term plan to make sure that the committee will have the required resources? Is there a plan to reassess the needs according to the first trials?
Je peux dire,
I can tell you.
I think there is a preliminary amount that's been identified. It's really an issue for our colleagues at the Privy Council office who are really the have the formal relationship with the new committee of parliamentarians. So I'm kind of mowing the Privy Council's front lawn here, but I will, in an effort to be responsive. They will be, funds have been set aside. There is a sense that it is an appropriate level for the new task. And I'm quite certain between the chair and the members that if that funding level isn't deemed to be sufficient, the government will hear loud and clear from the members. And the minister's been very clear that the strength and influence of the committee is directly related to its credibility. So I'm confident that
the committee will be consulted on their budgetary needs as time goes on.
They will, I'm sure, make their views known if they're feeling that's under-resourced. And in some ways, frankly, the heavy resourcing will be the response of agencies that, like you have here today, plus others, in responding to their requests.
Merci.
Ms. Dema, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses for being here for this this session, this hour with the committee. It's always very helpful. In the supplementary estimates, there's additional funding for improved mental health services for inmates and support for reintegration programs for Indigenous offenders. And I'm just wondering, of that money, is that any of that investment being used on screening when the person first arrives at a facility, and subsequent to the screening, directing them into specific mental health services to deal with whatever issue may be found? As we know, there's a high percentage, extremely high percentage of offenders who are arriving with pre-existing mental health conditions. So I guess, Ms. Kelly, that's probably directed at you, but I wonder if you could share with us if any of that money is being used for that.
Yes, thank you for the question. In terms of the monies that we're going to receive right now, we have a mental health strategy, and it's along a continuum of care. So there's screening that's done at intake when an offender arrives. We have primary health care, intermediate mental health care, and also psychiatric hospital care. In 2015, we had a gap in terms of the intermediate mental health care. And actually, through reallocation of resources, we were able to establish that in some of our institutions. But with the new funding, we'll be able to add this intermediate mental health care to more institutions, as well as intermediate mental health care in our maximum security prisons, so that basically the services are better matched to the needs of the offenders.
Thank you. And how much of that funding will be dealing with fetal alcohol syndrome, which we know is an issue for inmates when they're arriving at the facility and makes it difficult for both them and for staff? And I'm just wondering how much focus is being put on that particular issue.
Actually, with, again, the funding that we're going to receive, oftentimes what we see in offenders are challenging behaviors, but with an underlying mental health need. And oftentimes it is FASD or personality disorder. So the funding that we're going to receive is going to assist with those offenders.
Okay, thank you. My next question has to do with the funding you're receiving for Indigenous offenders and their release and reintegration into communities. And we heard testimony at our last meeting from the Union of Solicitor General Employees, and in particular parole officers, who were talking about challenges with people upon release having ID, and in order to find employment and housing and pretty much everything else they need when they're released, they don't have identification, including status cards in many situations. So I'm wondering if there's any ability with that funding that you're receiving to take a look at trying to integrate allowing these people to receive their identification prior to release rather than relying on doing it ahead of time. And I'm not talking about spending money to divert staff to take these people to a facility prior to, but I know I can renew my driver's license online. You know who the person is. They've got a federal ID. You know exactly who they are. So if any of this funding can be used to try and fill that gap in terms of providing ID to these people upon release.
This is something that we've been tackling for some time, and definitely even when I was a parole officer, what we say as soon as an offender arrives, that's the first thing that we ask in terms of ID and what's required, and actually help them, provide them with the forms and help them complete them so they have the proper ID upon release.
So I appreciate that. I guess there must be a bit of a disconnect in terms of actual operations. So I'll leave that with you. But our understanding is that while that may be done, there's not an ability for them to actually get it before release. So maybe you could just look into that, and I'll leave that one with you. In terms of we talked a little bit about the mental health, in particular on screening and FASD. I wonder if you could expand a little bit more. You are receiving a significant increase in funding for mental health and some of the other programs that you're able to deliver within corrections in terms of mental health services.
Again, for us, in terms of the monies that we're going to receive, is to be able to expand our mental health supports to offenders. And again, it's going to provide a better continuum of care. For us, the fact that we would receive, again, funding, so for maximum security offenders, we can provide them, both men and women, provide them intermediate mental health care where they are. Because right now, for example, for women, we have to transfer them to the regional psychiatric center in Saskatoon. Well, now with the funding, being able to actually treat women with mental illness at their facilities, to have the staff to be able to do so, that's going to lead to a reduction of interregional transfers. It means that they are with the same case management team that they know, and also that they're close to their community and family supports.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Damwa, Ms. Leach, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My first question is for the newest member of the committee here, Mr. Vigneault. We've had previous testimony at this committee with respect to the resources that you would require in order to make sure that Canadians are safe. And we recently had a professor from Wilfrid Laurier University commenting on how those resources may be lacking for us to be able to, and for you and your colleagues to be able to do your jobs well. Could you outline, maybe for myself, do you have the resources, human resources, the right talent, the right funding, the right material resources to do your jobs well? And if there is something lacking, what it is that you need to do your job well to make sure Canadians are safe?
Thank you very much for your question, Ms. Leach. This is obviously a very important issue for any accounting officer of any department, is the balancing of the resources available. So the way we do it is, in my case, when I arrived at CSIS, I had the chance to work with very experienced people who knew the business really well. I had the opportunity to know the business myself from different vantage points before. And so I knew some of the challenges. I was able to get much more details, after my arrival. And what I can tell you is that there are challenges, of course. The threat environment is complex, it's evolving. And so we are constantly, trying to find ways to assess the threat and put the resources in the right place. So we do that on a constant basis. One of the added challenges is on technology. So the way the technological environment is evolving, the pace at which it is evolving. So what we do is, we're trying to find the right balance between having new technology, the right people that we recruit, and the financial resources to operate. And so these are ongoing discussions within the organizations, and I share those the results of those discussions with the minister.
With respect to human resource talent, do you actually think we have the pool of Canadians to be able to do the things that you need them to do? Or should we be enhancing what educational processes we require in this country?
Well, I am extremely privileged to be leading an organization like CSIS. The men and women of CSIS are talented. They work extremely hard at protecting Canada's national interest and defending Canadians. And I'm always amazed by seeing the quality of the people we have. Recruiting people is always going to be an organization like CSIS who have to resort to the ingenuity of our people to defeat, the tactics of our adversaries. We work very closely with universities. We work especially in terms of the scientific skills, which we need more and more. Not that all of our employees need to have those specific skills, but they need to understand the overall environment that they operate in. And the threat is, the technological aspect of the threat is becoming more complex. So it is always for us trying to find the best people, languages, technological skills, but Canadian universities and the talent that is coming across the turnstiles every morning is phenomenal. And the people who are knocking at the door to join CSIS is also very high. So I think it's more our ability to ingest them than the quality of the candidates.
The other questions I have are with regards to the Canada Border Services Agency, and there's appropriations of $12.4 million. I was wondering if we could receive more of the details with regards to the $6.5 million for the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, the $3 million for implementing and administrating the federal framework on cannabis, in particular, as I had asked the minister questions before, the $1.7 million with respect to the administration component, and actually, in addition to that, the capital expenditure of $70,000, which seemed like a bit of an odd add on to the expenditure list, since the others seem to have some very specific budget issues, and then there's $70,000 of a capital expense that just asking what that might be for.
Okay, thank you very much. With respect to the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, the agency is requesting $6.5 million, essentially to continue to investigate fraud and other offenses such as misrepresentation, to protect the integrity of the Temporary Foreign Workers Program and the International Mobility Program. The funding is essentially for hiring of criminal investigators. Criminal investigators will undertake investigations of complex cases of fraud. The kind of investigation would relate to an employer who is abusing employees or is employing them in ways that are not consistent with their work permit. So those are the kinds of investigations that take place.
Mr. Hill, unfortunately, we have no time for the balance of your response, so you can respond in whatever way you choose to afterwards. Mr. Fragiskatos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My friends on the other side have raised cannabis today a number of times. Mr. Brown, I wonder if you could give this committee your thoughts on the strict public policy rationale to move towards regulating, restricting, and taxing cannabis. We heard the minister during his testimony say that Canada has the highest youth use rate of cannabis in the entire industrialized world. I think that's one good place to start. But we also know that the distribution of cannabis is controlled by organized crime. Could you go into this? Because I think there's a great deal of, with all due respect, fear-mongering going on. And Canadians, well, let's hear the facts. So if you could go into...
At this point, officials are to fulfill the mandate of their minister, and so I am concerned about officials expressing opinions about these things. Nevertheless, I'm going to allow the question given those parameters.
Thank you, Chair. That's a very helpful reminder. I can lay out for you I could describe as policy rationale for the approach. You're absolutely right. I think it's well documented that the use of cannabis among youth in Canada is the highest or among the highest in the world. And those trends have existed for a while and are continuing to, I guess the phrase would be deteriorate. It's also true that the distribution system is dominated by organized crime, and that the knock-on effects of the funding stream, if I can put it that way, of that business model in terms of funding other activities of organized crime, links to money laundering, links to human trafficking, prostitution. I think it is well documented about the interplay between cannabis as well as other kinds of drugs. So the perspective of the government is that a structured, very deliberate regime of distribution, controlling the access, legalizing access to people either of the age of majority or higher, is an important part of allowing resources to be shifted to police and other organizations to combat the illegal network, as well as deal with ensuring that there's focus on the criminal networks that are associated in distribution. It's really probably not appropriate for me, use my mowing someone else's front lawn analogy again. My colleague, the Deputy Minister of Health, is a better place to talk about the regulatory structure and regime that they will be responsible for developing, but it will cover everything in terms of distribution, access. We've seen every provincial and territorial jurisdiction beginning to take steps in terms of their roles constitutionally, in terms of a legalized framework. So I think we can, I can assure the committee that every step that can be taken is being taken by officials at both the federal and provincial and territorial levels to ensure that everything that needs to be done is done when July of next year comes.
Thank you very much for that. Ms. Kelly, the question about mental health supports has been asked, but I wonder if you could go into specific examples of programming that exists for the especially vulnerable inmate population. We heard at the outset numbers quoted about the very difficult circumstances that many of these inmates have experienced, and wanting to, and considering that challenge and that challenging circumstance, I want to know, can you touch on specific programs that where the funding that exists here, where it will be allocated?
Okay. In terms of the funding that's being allocated, again, it's to expand our mental health supports to offenders. Obviously, in terms of some of the offenders that have some, again, challenging behaviors that may otherwise sometimes end up in administrative segregation, having an intermediate mental health care present is going to help. In terms of programs, we do have, again, a suite of programs. We have what we call the Integrated Correctional Program Model, and it's actually adapted for offenders that present challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Fragiscatos. Mr. Van Kesteren.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being with us this morning. And I apologize for the discord that we had earlier. This is a place of battle, and some of us feel, many of us feel, that C-45 is the most destructive piece of legislation that's ever been introduced in this House. We all have children. We all have grandchildren. I was pleased this morning to hear the arrival of my 36th grandchild. You heard that right? 36. Wow. And I want to tell you, too, that I have 3 sons that are policemen, and I have great respect for, and I know we all do have great respect for our law enforcement. Without getting into the weeds too much, Mr. Michaud, if you would comment, is there sufficient funds, and are your forces ready for what you can expect to happen when marijuana is made available or legal for 18-year-olds and up to be consuming? Can you just give us a comment on that, maybe?
So, from our perspective, there's definitely, like, more time would be better, because the more time we would have, the readier we'd be. However, that being said, is that we are working towards, whenever this new act becomes before us, that we're in a position to be able to deliver our services the best way we can. So, as you've seen, part of the sub-speed that we have right now, there's funding that is set aside to basically start the training that will be required for our frontline police officers to engage with some of the stakeholders that will be involved in the business. So for us, really, it's working with what we have to make sure that we can deliver the best service and continue to protect the Canadian public.
Do you have any idea what kind of increase you're going to have? Has there been any studies done as far as in the complexities of identifying a new type of driver? I mean, it's not completely new, but I'm sure you must. Has there been any studies done to see just how many more impaired drivers we're going to see on the road?
I cannot comment. I would have to go back to see if there's been a study made around the impaired driving piece, because it's not in my field of expertise. I'm on the federal side of the business, but I could go back and come back with an answer on that one.
Go ahead, Chair. 2 minutes. Wonderful. The question, and Ms. Kelly, you haven't had any action there, and I think maybe it's a time that we directed. Actually, Peter gave you a question, and maybe I'll follow up on that. Last week, I think it was last week, we were talking about your area of expertise and what you lead, correctional services. How do you feel about the the fact, and we had the mums here, the acronym mums, I forget what it stands for. Basically, it's mums that have children or in the institutions. How do you feel about, if marijuana is legal, allowing inmates to smoke marijuana?
That's, with greatest respect to that question, I think that you are entitled to your opinion as a private citizen, but as an official and in this context, I'm not sure that you need to answer the question directly. However, I allowed Mr. Fragiscato's question, and I don't see why I wouldn't allow the question of Mr. Van Kesteren.
Well, what I'll say is we don't allow offenders to drink. We don't allow offenders to use drugs, although we do have drugs that come into the institution. It's not consistent with them working towards their correctional plan. That's our focus. Our focus is for them to participate in programs, participate in interventions that we offer, and basically what's paramount is the safety of the public. So what we want to do is to motivate them to participate into programs and then have a safe and successful release into the community and ensure that they don't return.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. And in order to be able to respect our time and get the votes dealt with, Mr. Spengman, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I think that's exactly the time that I need to ask the question, which I'm about to ask. It's a follow-up question to the Minister's testimony regarding the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and Prevention of Violence. And I made reference earlier to the tragedies in Quebec City and Sainte Foy, and also in Sutherland Springs. My question relates to the connection between counter-radicalization work and mental health. The Canadian public and the American public are reeling from these events. We're asking questions, what would possibly motivate somebody? In some cases, there's a clear connection to particular faiths. In other scenarios, it's simply the fact that people are meeting in a place of worship, and there's a large number of people who are then subject to potential targeting. Can you comment on the role and the importance of mental health considerations in connection to the work on counter-radicalization?
Sure. I think it's important to be careful not to conflate mental health issues with uniformly conflate mental health issues with the broader question of radicalization to violence. There are at times, and there are demonstrated cases that clearly have a link to underlying mental health issues, and there are other times that that's not the case. So that's a premise. I think it's important not to just sort of conflate the two questions, and I don't think you did, but just for clarity purposes. The second point I'll make is that there is no question part of what the centre, the role of the centre is in part to facilitate local community groups. Montreal Centre is well known, and there are centres all across the country. And there is an ongoing conversation and dialogue about mental health defined broadly. You can have young people who are disaffected, who may be showing early signs of disassociation and that kind of thing. So I think it is intermingled, and it is a very complex issue. I think law enforcement around the world is trying to sort their way through that, as are all the organizations that are interested in the whole question of how you, what are the early signals? And sometimes it's mental health, and sometimes it's just associations, whether it's online or in person, and that may not be a mental health issue. So it really is a full spectrum analysis that needs to be done by these local groups empowering families to understand signs, creating safe spaces for families to go so that they, is it a mental health issue? Is it a question of illegality? Even so, are there safe places where the diversion can take place? We do it in other parts of the criminal justice system. So that's part of the conversation that I think has to take place.
Thank you, Mr. Spengeman. That brings to an end our questioning of the witnesses. In order to minimize disruption, I'm going to just continue with the meeting. The witnesses may stay or not, as the case may be. But to also invite colleagues, we have 11 votes, and I would entertain a motion to consolidate into one vote. That appears to be moved by Madam Danoff. You've heard the motion. I'm assuming that there's no objection to it. I'm assuming as well on division. Those in favor of the motion? Consolidated on division. Those in favor of the vote on division? Carried. Thank you. Oh, meeting adjourned.